Okay, it is 12:34, 4/21/2024. I'm Justin Krukar, and we are here with.
Suzie Martin.
And what is your occupation?
Currently, I am an infusion nurse, a registered nurse.
And how did you get interested or get into the commercial fishing business?
Basically, I was born into it. My dad, Travis Evans, was a commercial fisherman, and we would work on the boat whenever he was in port. And during summers, we would go to sea with him. And mostly when I was of my era, my age, because I have 7 siblings and we range in age. But at that time, he was an albacore fisherman. And so I fished albacore in the summers growing up.
And when and where was this taking place? Was this out of Avila? Was this out of Morro or Santa Cruz?
His boat was out of Morro Bay, and we would always leave June 17 because June 16th was my mother's birthday and their anniversary. So we would always leave the next day. And it would take us about a week to travel to Oregon. And we would port in either Astoria, Oregon or Ilwaco, Washington. And we would refuel and get provisions and then begin our albacore season. We would fish all the way up if there was anything to be found, but we stayed fairly close to shore. And albacore like warmer water instead of the cooler water.
Hmm. And what was your earliest memory of fishing or being on the water?
I was probably about 11, and I helped my dad pick up a boat. He had traded a boat, and they were both of them fairly small boats. And we were taking the boat to, I believe it was Half Moon Bay or Bodega Bay. I'm not sure which one. I think it was Bodega Bay, and traded for another boat. And of course, this was a boat that he didn't have really any experience with. He just picked it up. And on the way south, we lost power and we had to call the Coast Guard. He took the blanket or sleeping bag that we had and strung it up from the boom and the mast to make a sail. And we had no food, no water other than just a few snacks that we had taken with us. I think there was a thermos of coffee, and that was all we had. And this boat was very primitive. It didn't really have much of a cabin. It had shelter and it had a bunk, but it didn't have a galley, as I remember. And it had no head, which is a bathroom. And we were in some heavy seas, and my dad had to use the railing to go to the bathroom. And when he did, his billfold fell out of his pocket into the ocean. And so now we also didn't have any money. Not that there was anything we could buy there, but because we were broken down, the Coast Guard found us in the morning and they towed us into port, and we had no money. So he had to be resourceful, and my mom came and picked us up.
You
So
left.
that was my first memory of fishing. Although I worked on the boat far younger than that, but that was a pretty memorable trip.
Was there any danger of capsizing or
Not really capsizing, starving to death, maybe. Fortunately, the radios were able to reach shore and get the Coast Guard, and that was very good. And we could see the lights of shore, but we couldn't get there. And so we were pretty stranded.
and is there anything that you remember your father telling you? Any stories or things of his younger days about his boating experiences?
Well, he's told a lot of stories. He once caught several basking shark in his net. I believe this was on the Catherine, but I'm not sure. And he was towing, and he caught these basking shark in the net, and they're very large animals. And it tore the stern off. And he was fishing by himself. He doesn't swim. And he fell into the water. And the boat is moving slowly, but it is moving in a direction. And he was able to latch onto the net and crawl back onto the stern, up onto the boat, where he was able to then navigate back to shore. And that was pretty, it's a rather scary situation to not be able to swim. And if he had not grabbed a hold of the net, the boat would have continued, and he would have either drowned or died of hypothermia.
Wow. Wow, that's scary. Yeah. Yeah. Um, and how long did you fish for him or any other, outfits that you may have fished for? How long was that?
Well, I fished um, from the age of 12 when I could be some help. I had to be old enough to actually do some work. When I was a baby, my mom took us all out. But when I was about 2, my brother drowned, and she kind of lost heart, and she always got seasick. She was miserable the whole time. But she wanted to keep the family together. But after his death, she pretty much stayed home and did shore duty, which is what we kind of call it. She would buy provisions. She would meet us in the port. She would help get parts. There was a lot to it. She had a radio at home, so she could talk to us if we were within radio range. If we were far, then we used the marine operator, and there's a lot of stories with that. But then when I was able to be of use, then I worked as a deckhand with my dad. And he taught me how to read a Loran A, which was, he had used a surplus Loran that he got from the Navy. And it had been on an airplane. It had one of those rubber sleeves, a gasket that you would put your head on like this. He had a little seat he had built that folded down, so you would fold it down and sit on it, and then 2 handles to hold on in case the weather was bad. And then you would have to count the oscillations and different channels. And by counting the oscillations, then you could triangulate where you were on a chart, and that would be a maritime chart that had the Loran lines on it. And so depending on what channel you were on, the reading would be, and it would triangulate from Loran stations, and you would find out where you were. It was approximate. It wasn't very accurate, and it was pretty rudimentary. It was not entirely reliable because depending on where you were, if you were off of Mexico, you could only get a somewhat accurate reading at dawn and at dusk. The rest of the time, you would get skip from the Gulf of Mexico, and it would tell you, if you took a reading at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, it would tell you that you were somewhere off of Texas or Louisiana or something. So it wasn't 100%, but it was what we had at the time. And then later, we got Loran C. And my first Loran C was with my first boat, and it was like so high tech compared to what I had learned on. It was very
Mhm.
interesting.
So you were the captain of your own boat at one point?
Yes,
Oh.
I shared with my husband. We were both masters of our vessel, and we leased a boat first. We were pretty inexperienced because both of us had been deckhands. So my first husband, Ken Morton, had worked as a deckhand aboard my dad's boat and loved it. And then he also worked for another fisherman out of Astoria, Oregon, Charlie Budai, on the Supreme. And he deckhand with him. And he just fell in love with fishing. But he was going to school as a farmer at Cal Poly. And so it was still a gamble, still harvesting food, but much different than farming. And he was sort of disillusioned with his classes and felt like he really knew more than his professors and he wasn't getting anywhere. So he dropped out in his last semester. And we got married and we did shore jobs at first for the first 2 years of our marriage. And then one day we were coming down to see my parents, and on the way we saw a boat offshore, and we were at Shell Beach coming around the bend. And I said, "Oh, I miss fishing." And he said, "You do?" And so we decided to go back into it together because we didn't want it to be like my mom and dad had in the latter years where they were apart. So we decided that we would fish, but we would do it together. And so that's how I ended up. We leased a boat out of Moss Landing, and we asked my dad to come and help us. And he knew the boat, and he kind of helped show us a little bit of the mechanics and things like that. But we were really over our head because we'd only worked as deckhands. We didn't really know how to be a captain, and the responsibilities are different. It's not just washing dishes and pulling fish. It's changing oil and having spare parts. And what do you do if the radio direction finder doesn't work? Or there's just a lot of things that you need to know.
Mhm. And how long was that? Did you have that boat?
That was in 1975, and I fished until 1982. In 1982, we bought a boat that was a dragger, not a troller. And that meant there was no stern, no stern railing, so that you could, I'm sorry, that you could pull the net over the stern. Had a roller and a big winch that would bring the net over. And then it had a boom, and it would lift the net up and a purse string at the bottom of the net, and you'd pull the purse string and maybe 10,000 pounds of fish would fall onto the deck. Well, I had a 3-year-old and a newborn, and it was more than I could do. I couldn't tend to the baby if I was out working the deck. I couldn't watch my 3-year-old who could walk off the stern or could get her hair caught in the winch and all of the electronics that were going on. And so that's when I had to start doing shore duty because I just couldn't be safe with my children. I did go out on occasion when he fished thresher shark and some rock cod. We took the kids, but that type of fishing is entirely different than dragging.
Hmm. And that the shark fishing, um, there was a boom at that time. I know there was in the 40s when the war was going on, but was there another one like you're saying with the thresher sharks?
Are you speaking of a mechanical boom that lifts them up, or which is what I was referring to, or are you talking about a boom in the industry?
A boom in the industry. Yeah.
Um, I was new to thresher shark fishing. Um, I'm not certain if there was a boom. I know my husband was looking to find whatever was most profitable. And so, um, also, by establishing that you had a license and you fished, then you could, if it ever became required to have a permit, then you would have a history in that industry. And I believe my father talked about how he missed out on one industry because he was trying to do another. And if you weren't active in that season, then you were eliminated.
Hmm. And for you, was it? I know a lot of other fishermen talk about like limited entry uh, to commercial fishing because of costs and things like that nowadays. Did you find that was the case when you began or when you bought your fishing vessel? Was
With
that
albacore, there was no issue. It was easy to get a license. After, I think it was around 1979, um, there was, Canada decided to enforce the 200-mile limit. And they would confiscate your boat and your catch and would put you in jail if you came inside the 200-mile limit. Prior to that, there was sort of this agreement that albacore was a highly migratory species. And so who could really claim it as theirs? Because it traveled from Japan to the Gulf of Alaska, down the Pacific coast, and then back to Japan in a span of a year. So nobody ever really claimed it was theirs. So anyone could fish in any water. We couldn't go inside the 12-mile limit, the international line, or the state line, but we could fish within the 200-mile limit. Unless you had a breakdown or something, you could go into a port there. But of course, that would be different. You wouldn't fish if you were going into port. So when that happened, then they were not even allowing licenses. But Mexico, the following year would allow, or the following winter, allowed us to purchase a license. And we were able to fish off of Mexico within the 200-mile limit. Again, you couldn't go inside 3 miles, but you could fish off of Mexico if you had a license. I believe it was $200 at that time. So we would also have to have a California license, and then you would sell inside of California. You couldn't sell in Mexico. If you had to go to port, even in an emergency, they would assume that you had caught the fish inside the 3-mile limit, and you would be jailed and lose your fish in your boat. So it was very strict. We made every effort not to do that. Then when we went, when my husband decided to buy a dragger, he was foreseeing that there was limited entry in Alaska and Washington, Oregon. He was seeing the future that at some point there might be more value to the permits than the vessel itself. And he thought that it would be an investment. So by buying a dragger with a license already and fishing that, at some point that license would be, you could sell for maybe $300,000. And that would be more than the cost of the vessel. So he looked at it as an investment.
Did it turn out that way?
Not particularly for us. Yeah, the boat we bought was always breaking down. We lost a lot of money with that boat. We sold it. We had to repossess. The guy beached it, and he didn't make his payments, and so we really lost money on that vessel.
And kind of switching topics here, when you first, were launching out of Morro Bay, what did it look like physically? How did the harbor look? Does it look similar to today? What
The
was
harbor
the
itself
boats
was
and
pretty much similar. There was a dredge boat that would dredge the bar now and then. Um, there was the light at the end of the breakwater. They have improved the road. They don't let you go as far around the rock on foot, or you can go on foot, but you can't go by car. You used to be able to drive a little further. The I forgot the name of the statue that's there, but there's a memorial for the families that are left behind, and it's a woman waving to her seagoing seamen, and she has her children there. And I've stood in that very spot many times waving goodbye as my spouse or dad left port. That was not there until more recently. The Fisherman's Memorial wasn't there. It's there now. And it was stagnant for a number of years. They didn't have funding to even put my husband's name on it because he perished at sea. His name was not added for a number of years because they didn't even have funds for that. But that's been remedied. They've changed a little bit for the sports launch for people that are sport fishing. That's changed a little bit, but that didn't really affect us because we never could use it. The only time we used it was when my dad launched the Bountiful. So the city's changed more than anything, but the harbor hasn't changed too much. A little bit with the pier, there was a fire, and they had to do some repairs, and But aside from that, I don't remember much being different.
So for the most part, the I guess the Embarcadero has looked the same since I guess your
Pretty
father
much. A
came.
lot of the structures are the same, maybe some little remodeling here and there.
Hmm. And how does the harbor, I guess, like, is there a change in the like makeup of the boats? Do you see more
Yeah, I don't see
yachts
the
or
albacore
mostly?
boats there that I used to. Um, it used to have be quite the port for the albacore fishermen around the equinox. So in the fall equinox, we never fished south of Cape Mendocino until after the fall equinox because of weather. And then after that, the fish would be down here and we would come back to port here in Morro Bay. We always tried to sell our fish in a cannery port because you get a better price. So cannery ports would be San Francisco, Astoria, or Ilwaco, um, and San Diego, San Pedro. The other ports, you could sell your fish, but not as much. You wouldn't get as good a price
Hmm.
because they had to transport them. So you could understand why they wouldn't. But we would like to come into our own home port because we could see family, we could, get tools or clothes or whatever from the home.
Hmm. So you never really sold in Morro Bay, like locally?
I did,
Oh.
yes. And the very last year that I albacore fished, they allowed us to sell from the dock. They had never allowed us to do that before. And so our last load of albacore, I sold fish by fish. My husband was training on the boat we had just purchased, the Corsair. So he was fishing with the prior owner, John Todd, out of Santa Barbara, dragging. So while he was doing that, I was running the sea adler to keep the refrigeration going, to keep the fish frozen. And we had a spray brine system. And so I would run the engine every day, keep the fish frozen, and then sell from the dock. And at that time, we were selling them for $1 a pound. And I would have to go down into the fish hole, carry a fish that might weigh 25, 30 pounds up a ladder with one hand, and then take it up the ladder of the pier of the dock in order to sell it. And we had a set of scales that were um, authorized by weights and measures, and we're able to sell right off the dock. Or sometimes we actually delivered. If it was somebody here and we were coming back to Arroyo Grande, then we didn't mind bringing it.
Mhm. So you're selling to individuals, not like a
Yes, no,
corporation
that
or
we sold the last, I don't know how many ton it was, but we sold it one by one.
wow.
Yeah, some
Yeah.
people would buy more than one, but yeah,
Cool. Yeah, today it's totally different. You're selling to big
yes, the
corporations and
fish buyers, yeah.
exactly.
But we could get a better price when we sold fresh or if we sold direct to the public because we didn't have the overhead. So we would get a better price. We wouldn't get $1 a pound from the fish buyer in Morro Bay. So we were able to get our price up a little bit.
Hmm. I know you said your last season was for albacore, but if you did keep up with kind of like the trend of fishing, did you notice a difference in um, fish species that were caught or targeted species that were coming through Morro Bay?
Well, I can't say after I left the industry much. We did not notice any change in albacore. We caught, there were more albacore than the fleet could catch. You just had to know where they were. And there were times when there were so many fish jumping around us that if we would have had the capacity, we could have filled our boat in an hour. But there were just the two of us. And many times we're pulling by hand or with hydraulics just to get the line closer to the boat and then land them by hand. And there was one day, there were so many fish, and I'm pulling as fast as I can. And my husband was up on the flying bridge to look for the next school and yelling at me, "There's a fish over there." And I could not pull the fish fast enough. And by the end of the day, he had no voice. He was so excited because there were fish everywhere. So I did not see any change in albacore. Um, and when he went into dragging, he was catching a lot of fish with the Corsair when the previous owner was showing him the different tows and where to fish. Um, I believe a lot of that was skill and knowledge, and so he had to do some learning. You know, there was a learning curve for that, but there was never any shortage for what he was trying to catch. We had limits on certain things. You know, if he caught crab, we could consume it, but we couldn't sell it, things like that.
And and how is regulation, I guess, if you've kept up with that as well, how's regulation changed? It seems like it was kind of, as many as you could catch, like you were just saying. But
Well, there
nowadays, is
was
that?
mesh size. We did have to adhere to mesh size. And so the size of the hole of the net would ensure that we weren't just raping the ocean. And we had no intention of doing that, anyways. We understood preservation of the species. So we always wanted to protect our future. And so that was really important to us. But um, if the fish is already dead on your deck, it seemed senseless to throw it overboard, you know. And so sometimes the regulations were not very, didn't always have a lot of common sense. I understand not wanting to overfish a species, but I think you need to look at the whole picture. And so one thing I did see when my brothers were fishing after I got out of it, that I remember my dad saying, I feel like I have an ankle bracelet on, that the fishing game know my every move. If I go 1 foot inside the 3 mile limit, they're on me. Um, it's You have to take a scientist on board. There's all of these regulations. And I mentioned before that my brother went out and caught in 1 3 hour tow his entire month quota, whereas a scientist who helped determine the quotas went out, didn't catch anything because he didn't have the knowledge and skill to know where to fish and how to fish. It wasn't that his equipment was inferior or anything like that. He had to abide by the same rules that my brother did, but it has to do with skill. And so not all fishermen are equal. You know, we call them highliners when they're a really good fisherman, because they consistently can get those good numbers.
Mhm. And are your brothers still fishing, or are you the
No,
youngest?
my both my brothers have sold their boats to back to the government to sell their licenses, and those boats can be used for pleasure. People could live on them, but they can never be used for commercial fishing again.
And do you think that was, or did you support their decision, or do you think that was,
Because I feel like the fishing industry is dying, and I feel that because of regulations, over regulation perhaps. Um, it, I just don't see that there's much of a future in it. Um, I think it's very competitive, and so for them at the time, it was probably the best financial move. At least they got something for their boat. So it's hard to say because you can't predict the future.
right?
But
And
I feel like my son is in a dying industry. For a while, he was the only halibut fisherman out of Port St. Louis. Now there are a few others because they saw his success. It drew more people, but it's harder now. And I don't think he's catching as many fish. And I'm not sure if that has to do with his nets or the weather or research that's going on, the cables that are being put down. There's halibut have very sensitive hearing, and weather can change it. When there's heavy rains, it causes the muddy water to wash offshore. The halibut move offshore, and that makes it easier for him to catch because they're outside the 3 mile limit. The sports fishermen can do better than he can because they don't have the same restrictions.
Do you think it's a combination of, recreational and government and I guess like um, international fisheries that are kind of, bringing down the industry?
I'm not really sure what I think it's multifactorial. I think environment has something to do with it. I think regulation. I think the lack of regulation. I think it has been fished. The halibut fishing has been fished a lot, but then there's the wind farms, the solar farms out on or the wind farms out at sea. There's the Diablo nuclear power plant, the offshore drilling. All of these things have impacted fishing in one way or another. So I think it's multifactorial.
In your experience, has any regulation helped you guys, or like commercial fishing? Has any of them helped, in your opinion?
I can't say that I've benefited from it other than if it is truly protecting the species, then perhaps. I know that the marine sanctuary has lessened the amount of fishing area that we, are able to harvest from. And so, like my dad says, there's more fish out there than we could ever take. But I think we need to be selective.
Hmm. Um, yeah, a lot of the fishermen I talked to kind of shared the same. They're putting their hopes on the younger guys now, like your son and Garrett Rose, who's out of Morro Bay. Um, I know you said it's kind of a dying industry, but do you think there is a hope for, not a complete uh, overtaking of the industry by, these big corporations that are, also processors themselves? Do you think there's still, a hope for the mom and pop type operations?
I see more of that being a possibility for someone who has an alternate source of income. So when I was albacore fishing, there were many teachers who would work during the school year and then take the summer off to fish albacore or salmon. And they did quite well, but they had a supplemental income. My son would not survive if it wasn't for his wife working full time. It's been very difficult. Mechanical problems, lack of fish, net problems, you name it, there's always something. And so um, I think that would ensure success. I don't know that it would be as profitable. If you were a bachelor and you're just living aboard and you don't have to support a family and you don't have to make a house payment, then maybe. But if you're trying to support your family, I think it's a lot harder these days.
And are fishermen looking for more help, or are they just kind of thinking, oh, well, this is it. I'm the last one, and I'll go it alone. Like Mark Tognazini Senior said, he said, last one standing gets all the toys, and now he's got all the toys, but he doesn't. His son's not in the business, so he kind of expects he's the last one.
Yes. Danny's son gets seasick and has no interest in becoming a fisherman. So Danny will be the last of our family to fish. My brothers are older and retired. So Danny is the last one. It's kind of sad to see this legacy ending. Um, I think that the older fishermen will fish until they can't fish anymore. And if they have someone to pass their vessel on to, there's the Dancing Bear out of Port San Luis. and Bill has passed his boat on to his son.
Bill,
And
is that Bill Blue?
no, Bill, it'll come to me in a minute. Starts with a W.
No problem.
Ward, Bill Ward. Yeah. Yeah. And he has a dancing bear, and now his son, Harry, is fishing it. And so Harry is about the same age as my son. And I think anybody older than that will just retire, and um, there, I doubt there'll be much left. You have to really love it. It's hard work. It's dangerous. I've lost a husband and a brother to this industry. My son gets up at 2:30 in the morning to go out in miserable weather, launch his skiff, take it out to the boat, fight off the sea lions, which will, even though he's put netting and big posts around his boat to keep them off, will still get on board. And he's having to fight a 1,000-pound bull for the territory because the bull thinks that's his boat. And my son, and they just thrash the boat. They really just tear it up. And then he's got the seagulls that, defecate on the boat and all of that. In his case, he has a cabin, but there is no real, there's no way to cook. So he does day trips only. And so he goes out for a day and he works really hard. And the other day he fished all day. He comes in the afternoon, maybe 2:30, 3 o'clock. He had 2 fish. Doesn't even pay for fuel. With the price of fuel these days, and what about insurance? Insuring these boats is very expensive, and all the maintenance that's involved, and the net, and just everything that's involved. It's really expensive, and there's no guarantee. Some days he goes out and he gets nothing, or he goes out and he tears up his net and gets nothing. So it's very difficult work with not a lot of reward. I think for him, and speaking for him, um, he really enjoys fishing and he likes working for himself. He likes that independence. It's as bad as it is, he really does enjoy it. His father was the same way. I didn't have that same love. I liked the ocean and the fishing, but I'm a very social person, and I missed that when I wasn't on shore. I loved going in port and meeting fishermen. I could hear their voice and knew them by their voice on the radio. And I'd turn in a restaurant and say, "You must be Conrad," because I recognized their voice, but had never seen their face before.
Have you been a part of or know about any activism regarding promoting younger fishermen to get into the business, or is it because, or you haven't because, or you haven't seen it because it's not something that's important nowadays, or
I
I
don't
don't know.
know anyone currently that's promoting or recruiting fishermen. I have not heard of that at all. My dad, back in the 80s, was taking some juvenile delinquents. There was a school in Paso Robles, and he would take them out on a program where he would teach them about hydraulics and mechanical things and fishing and navigation and all of that. And really, in fact, he received the Tam O'Shanter Award from Senator Hayakawa for his achievements in promoting, not fishing, but promoting the rehabilitation of these young men and giving them some future, some knowledge to help them succeed in life. It was far more than fishing. I don't think one of them went into fishing. That wasn't the point. The point was to show them the benefit of hard work and learning about everything. When you're on a boat, it is a self-contained city. So you have electricity, you have plumbing, you have fuel, you have mechanics, the engine, um, there's the wind and the weather and current, and there's all of these things. So you learn about the stars and everything when you're on a boat. It is, I learned more on my summers at sea than I did in my school year. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and what was the fishing community like? Was it and has it changed? I kind of faced a little bit of um, uh, not pushback, but hesitancy at interviewing or recording because uh, they've expressed that their views have been distorted by media or news channels, things like that. Do you see
I'm
that?
not sure about that. I can't speak to that. What I have seen is when I fished albacore, it was a very tight community, and you would give your life to sacrifice to save someone if there was anyone in danger. And the first year, the boat that we had, we were not mechanical. We didn't have experience other than being just deckhands. So there was a lot we didn't know. And we had a lot of breakdowns. And the other fishermen gave us advice. They gave us maybe we had people pass us fuel and groceries when we were getting low so we could stay out on the fishing grounds. And we would on a slow day we would gather together close enough that we could actually yell over the engines of three different boats. I have pictures of us coming together when it was calm but there was no fish. So this was our community, our social hour, and we could talk freely without having the whole world hear us on the radio. And I would bake whenever it was calm. And so I baked cookies and cakes and pies, and I would float them over in a Tupperware or a Cool Whip bowl, and they would pick them up. And these are guys who, most of them didn't have women aboard. None of them had women aboard. I was one of the few wives that fished. And so for them to get a home baked dessert was a real special thing. And then in return, they would get a trash bag and they would put in magazines, books. Back then it was 8-track tapes or cassette tapes, and send those back to us. So it was like a little exchange, and it was so exciting. It was like our favorite time to be able to really talk to somebody and have that social hour. I remember once there was a couple from Morro Bay that were fishing near us, and it was a really stormy night. And we had a lot of difficulty that night. We were in severe danger. But there was a boat from Morro Bay, and in the morning they had discovered that the boat had been hit by another ship, and the ship never even knew that they had hit them, and nothing was left but splinters in their bodies. Some Canadian fishermen, not even US fishermen, Canadian fishermen picked up the bodies and two boats, and they left the fishing grounds to take because the Coast Guard would come out beyond the 200-mile limit, but they went and took them into port so that they could deliver them to their families. That was sacrifice. That not only was a kind thing to do, but they sacrificed their time to earn a living for their families in order to do that for total strangers. They didn't even know them. And that was very typical. More than once, we assisted the Coast Guard in, we had a nice steel boat at one point, and we were a good target, so radar target. So another boat was in distress in heavy seas, and it was a wooden boat taking on water. We hovered nearby to be the radio signal, the radar signal for the Coast Guard plane that came out. And in case they had to evacuate the boat, we could pick them up. So we hovered nearby for I don't know how many hours. The plane found them, dropped a pump. They were able to evacuate the water and stabilize enough to get into port on their own. And then we went on our way. We did things like this all the time. We were a community. And the same thing when we went into port. we loved meeting up with everyone. I would cook on my boat, and sometimes my dad, when I was on the wooden boat, I had a diesel stove. My dad had 120 volt when he was running his generator, and so he had a convection oven and a hot plate. So I would cook things on my diesel stove and cook things over on my dad's, and I had some beaters, and I would tuck a bowl with the beaters in it, and I would shimmy my way up the ladder, go down the next ladder to his boat, and use the mixer and bake the cake, and then shimmy back and come to my boat, and then we would have all of our friends come, and we would have a great big spaghetti meal with cake or pies or whatever. We were just one big family. There were very few fishermen that were tight about their information. So there was a couple who would never tell you what their numbers were. But at the end of the day, we'd say, we caught 115 fish today. And somebody else would say, well, we only got 97. And someone else would say, we got 130 or whatever. And so we would share our numbers and our location. Or if we hit a really good school, we'd get on the radio and say, hey guys, there's fish all over here. Come to this location. And then you would see the fleet congregate, because we had to rely on each other to be able to find the fish. The Pacific Ocean's huge. And the, the fishing industry, the fishing association, had research boats that would go out in the different areas to help us find fish, but they couldn't cover everything. And so we would share this information. It wasn't as competitive because, like I said, there were more fish than we could possibly catch. Nowadays, my son doesn't even want to tell me how he did that day because he doesn't want it to end up on Facebook or for me to tell somebody that he knows, and then it get back to another fisherman, and then they go out before he gets to that spot, or they are cutting where his toe is or something like that. It's a lot more competitive. And so nowadays I find it's more secretive. People are not as willing to, they watch him. I mean, he is on, when he goes out on the dock, they're watching what time he leaves. They're out there seeing what his catch is when he comes back. And then they decide whether they go or not. And he feels like he's the scout. And he gets resentful sometimes because he doesn't want to be the one taking all the risks while someone else just waits for him to find the fish first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's unfortunate that it's kind of gone that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about the other women you mentioned. There was only a couple. Um, do you remember who they were and what they did and
I
their
don't
outfit?
remember the name, but there was a woman on the Columbia, and they did winter in Morro Bay one year. Um, and
By the you mean the Columbia River or the
no,
name of
that
the
was the
boat?
name of their boat. They had a schooner style boat, and they fished albacore. I think they probably fished other fisheries as well, but I knew them through the albacore fishing. And she was on board. And then the Zabos, they lived on Catalina Island, and they all went together, and they had a large family, and the kids went fishing as well. Um, there were other people that went, a couple, the Shillelagh, I believe, was a man and wife. There were some that had children, and they homeschooled them back in the day when it wasn't easy to do. There wasn't a lot of programs for homeschooling. We didn't homeschool. We fished during the summers when we were out of school.
Was it mainly because maybe it was the women had like other jobs, or they didn't they got seasick like your own mother, or why do you think there
There's
was
various
very few?
reasons. Some
Yeah.
women would get seasick, some had no interest. It's a hard life. Um, I went 40 days without a shower, and let me tell you, that's not fun. And when you take 40 days worth of food, a lot of it's frozen or canned. And so you don't have fresh food. You never get to go out to eat because there is no restaurant. You have to cook every day, even if the weather's really lousy. You have to change what you cook. I remember the first meal I made, I when I went as an adult, I made, I think it was a hamburger helper in a skillet, and the skillet wasn't deep enough so that even though we anchored that night, there was enough of a swell. It spilled all over that diesel stove, made such a mess. It was just awful. And so you learn how to adjust. You have to cook in deep vessels. You don't overfill. If it's really rough, you have to choose something that is not going to slosh out of the pan. So spaghetti might not be a good choice on a really rough day. Um, I could only bake during calm weather because, and no matter how calm it was, the cake would always have a tilt, no matter what. Cookies would roll all to one side, if it was too rough. So you would have to, adjust based on the weather. And I forgot your question.
Why do you think there were so few
Oh, so
women?
few women.
Yeah.
I think it's just not a very glamorous lifestyle. You don't dress up. In those days there was no TV, there was no cell phone. We had radios. We had 9 radios, but they were not used for entertainment other than to listen to what other fishermen were saying. They were for business. So once in a while, if we were kind of traveling or something, we would have music on, and my dad would project it from our deck speaker. And so we could hear music, out on the deck. But that was very rare. All the entertainment would have to happen at night. And at the peak of the season, you're getting up at 4 in the morning, and you don't you're not done until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So by that time, you're really tired and ready to go to bed. And you're lucky if you've had time. If fishing's good, you haven't had time to prepare a decent meal. You have to get it when you can. And I swear fish can smell because they knew every time it was time to eat, as soon as we sat down, a fish would strike. So, your meals were always interrupted.
I know your father is a very religious man. Are you also?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
How did your religion play into how you fished or that whole
Well,
field of your life, area of your life?
we did have some other Christian fishermen that we really enjoyed visiting with them. When we went to different ports, we would attend the church in that port if we were there on a Sunday. Oftentimes, they were small little churches. I've been asked to teach Sunday school. My dad and mom have sung. My dad preached just on the spur of the moment. They would ask us to participate in these small churches. And it gave me the opportunity to meet people in different churches all up and down the coast, and that was really nice. Definitely, I had to rely on my faith when there were stormy seas and we were broken down and afraid for our lives. There were some very scary times, and I had to rely on my faith. And there were times when I didn't want to do this anymore. I wanted to go home. And I don't think I could have made it without my faith. And when you're on a 45-foot boat for 28 days with just your spouse, if you have an argument, there's not far to go. You can only go from stem to stern or down in the engine room or whatever. So you have to learn to communicate and to get along. And we definitely took guidance from the Lord for our decision making of what part of the industry to pursue and things like that. So it was very important. And then when I lost my husband, I don't know what I would have done without my faith. I was confident, Sorry if I get a little weepy. I was confident that my husband was going to heaven. He was a man of God. And um, that gave me reassurance. And then the strength of my Christian family, and I don't just mean my blood family, but my church family, just put their arms around me and my kids and bolstered us up. And it was just a really beautiful thing and has comforted me greatly. So it has played a big part. And
Yeah.
he's been gone since 1993, and I still get weepy.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, great testimony as well.
Thanks.
Yeah. Um, well, to kind of wrap things up and shift to a little, I guess, more positive note. What were some of your most memorable experiences fishing, either by yourself or with your spouse or with your dad when you were younger? What were some of the most memorable, or even doing shore duty?
Well, I'm not sure that this would be politically correct right now, but when I was, let's see, I think I was 14 or 15, um, I was a deckhand on my dad's boat, the Sea Adler, a steel boat, 65 feet by 16. And my sister would have been probably 12. And we took the pastor's son, who was 10 or 11, maybe 9, I don't remember. So the 3 kids, that was the crew. And so I did a lot of the cooking and helped with navigation and stuff like that. But of course, we didn't have to put the hours and the labor in that my dad did. So my dad went to bed, and it was after dark, and we were bored. And Ronnie really wanted to have some shark's jaws to take back home. That was what he really wanted. And at night, we would be drifting with the mast light, and my dad had a big shark hook. It was about this big. And he told us that if you wrap um, foil with some bacon around it, raw bacon, that it would attract the sharks and that we could catch one. So we did this one night, and there was this great white that came and grabbed our hook. This shark was about 16 feet long, and it was so big. I don't know how heavy it was, but the 3 of us could not get this shark on board. So we got it up to the rail, and I did the thing you're never supposed to do. I wrapped the line around my body. I wrapped the line around my arm. I did whatever I could. But once we got it up to the railing, which was just below our waist, my waist, we had to get it up over that railing, and we just weren't strong enough. This thing is still alive. It's still snapping its jaws. It writhes. It doesn't flap like an albacore does. It writhes. It twists, and it was all wrapped up in our line. And so we had it up so many times. Finally, I went and got my dad, who was sound asleep. I woke him up and I said, Dad, we need your help to get the shark on board. And he came out to the cabin door and he saw what we had. He said, Are you crazy? If you get that thing on board the boat, it will thrash the boat. It will tear it up. It's so big and strong. He said, No. And he went back to bed. We continued to fight with it. We had it gaff. I know it sounds so cruel, but it was our entertainment. We were trying to kill it or stun it so it would stop twisting and we could pull it over and stop snapping. And we could do nothing to this fish was more than we could bear. And so ultimately, we ended up cutting the line, which meant we lost our hook, which meant we couldn't fish for the shark anymore. So it was a major deal. But that was one of my childhood memories, and we never did get our shark's jaw. But it was quite the story.
Any other moments that gave you a lot of joy out there?
Uh, um, when when we caught 357 fish in one day, and we were so tired and, just really very happy that we had made so much money. And then to get a check, I remember one check, I think it was our first check, was $23,000. That was a lot of money back then. And to get it in one check, it's more than we had ever made on shore at one time. Of course, it had to last us a long time, but it was pretty impressive. I took a picture of it and put it in my photo album.
That is a lot.
Yeah,
When was that?
that was in 75.
Oh, yeah, that would have been a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of money. I don't remember how many ton of fish we had. Um, I don't remember, but it was a lot of money for us.
Mm. And lastly, what would be some good people I could talk to about fishing? Either maybe your brothers or your son or anyone else that he knows. Could you
Well,
recommend
my
anyone?
brother Tom has passed, and so that's not possible. My brother Phil lives in Alabama. If you want me to and you want to do a phone call, it's possible. He worked as a sea captain after he left fishing. So he grew up fishing. He fished for other fishermen as well. He deckhand for other fishermen. Um, I did not, but he did. Um, and then he worked as a captain on a ship that had deep sea divers. And you remember, maybe you don't remember, but there was a really bad fire on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico off of Louisiana.
Hmm.
And it was divers that were killed that were down below. And these are deep sea divers that like sandblast and weld below the surface. And there was a fire and they were killed. These were people my brother had worked with. He was not part of that particular mission, but he knew the people that were lost. And that's what he did. It takes special license and skill in order to keep a boat stationary that's got tubing, it's got oxygen and welding lines. You cannot get caught in your propeller, and to keep it stationary while they're doing their work. And so he did that for a number of years. So if you would like, I could give you his information, whether he'd be interested or not. Maybe Bill Ward. Have you talked to Bill Ward?
No, I've not.
I don't believe Bill fished out of Morro Bay. I think he only did Port St. Louis, but I'm not sure. And
Okay.
I could ask him. His son Harry has the dancing bear. Bill still fishes a little bit, but he's getting retired.
Hmm.
He and my husband were good. My first husband were good friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be
There
great.
is one other story if you want to hear
Yeah, anything. Go ahead.
it. This was crazy. So, first year as an adult, I was 19. So, that's how much of an adult I was, 19 or 20. It was the same night that couple died that was from Morro Bay, that their boat was hit. That night, before we went to bed, we knew the weather was going to get really rough. It was already rough. So we battened down the hatches. We tied down all of the hatches that we had on board, and that boat had a cockpit, not like in an airplane that's up front. The cockpit is a hole, a well in the stern that you would stand down in there, and it put you closer to the water line so that you could haul the fish over. So you would step down into this hole. But that is also a place for water to collect. So that got covered and everything tied down. Then we had to transfer fuel because we'd been out for 2 weeks, and we had deck tanks and we had hull tanks, and our hull tanks were running dry. The deck tanks were up on top, and we had a garden hose and a little water puppy pump. And we put the hose into the tank, and then the entrance to the fuel tank in the deck in the hull was in the bow on the deck. And so, because water is coming over our cabin, we stuffed it full of rags because you don't want water in your fuel. And I would have to help hold the hose in place with my husband, and he would be working with the water puppy pump back in the fuel tank. And so it was a 2-man operation. and we're just getting drenched. And it got to the point where he was afraid that the rags would not keep out the water and that we could be in worse danger by allowing water to enter the fuel. So he halted the operation. Very dangerous, because now we have on our starboard side half a tank of fuel that's above deck. So if you think about the momentum, um, if the tank's full, nothing's moving. If it's half full, it sloshes, and that causes momentum and the weight to shift. So it's a dangerous thing. You don't want to have to do it, but we were in a situation that we had to. So we finally finished with the fuel transfer as far as we could go. Then we had to go down into the engine room to tighten the belts on our generator and our engine. It was like, I don't know, maybe 150 degrees down there, because there was really not much ventilation and the engines never stopped. And so it was really, really hot. It would be so hot that my husband, I would sit on a 2x4 that was propped under the generator to leverage it. I wasn't strong enough to just push. I would have to sit and push. And he would get down to tighten the belts as I was pushing down. He would burn his ears on the engine because it was so tight and it was so hot. And we would be just drenched. And we did this. We're exhausted by this point. We've been up since 4 a.m. and this is late at night. Finally, we get the belts tightened. We get undressed. We go to bed. Now, I had these little peach baby dolls. I don't know if you know what those are, but it was the thing back in the day. And so it was a little nightie that I had, and I'm sleeping in a bunk above my husband. And the bilge alarm goes off. This is after we've gone to sleep. Oh, before that, I was awakened because I heard, as we rolled, I heard this boom, and then the boat would just shudder like this. And it woke me up. And then we rolled this way, and it was quiet, and we rolled back, and then boom, and we'd shudder. And so I woke my husband up. Something's wrong. I think maybe the flopper stopper, our stabilizer that hangs off of the trolling poles, had come loose and was hitting the hull. And I could just imagine it putting a hole in our wooden hull. And it scared me. So he was so tired, but he got up and he looked at the stays out of the wheelhouse, and everything looked stable to the stabilizer. So he went back to bed, not looking outside, and he would have seen what was really happening. So we went back to sleep, but it kept all night waking me up every time the boat rolled, because it would just shudder the boat. Well, finally get awakened by the bilge alarm, which is like those security alarms on a building, and it's just a piece of plywood between that and my head, so it's, jars you awake. Well, that meant he had to get in full weather gear. So he's in his yellow slickers, hip boots, hat. He goes out to pump the bilge. This was a hand pump, the kind you took a bucket, you primed it, and then you cranked like this, and it would pump out the bilge. Well, he went outside and he saw what was happening. The trolling pole stays had broken, and this pulls out like this, but this one would dip into the ocean, and then when we rolled back, come and slam a bit against the cabin and the mast. And that's what was happening. And it was on the same side as our fuel that's sloshing. So we are really in a dangerous situation, dipping and banging and dipping and banging. He runs in. He said, "Suzie, come out. I need you right away." So I ran out in my baby dolls. He's in the all-weather gear, and I'm in my baby dolls. I run out, and the water's breaking over the cabin. It's windy like you cannot believe, that really heavy seas. It's still dark, and we never had boots. We never bought boots that fit me. I always had somebody's hand-me-down boots that leaked, and they were too big. They were for men. And so we would roll them down, but they were still so big that they wouldn't stay on me. But I slipped on some hip boots and I ran out. So he said, he handed me the line to the pole, had 2 ropes, 2 stays, one at the top and one down lower on the pole. And he said, when the pole comes back, take a wrap on the cleat. And he said, I'll go at the base of the pole and help hold it in. So he goes to the railing and the pole comes in. He's holding onto it. I'm taking a wrap. But as the boat rolled back, he's going with it. His face is this far from the ocean. I grabbed the back of his neck and pulled him back because he was going over with the pole. There's no way. If you can think of a trolling pole as a pine tree, there's no way you can hold the pine tree at the base and keep it from falling. You just can't do it. So he said, okay, plan B. I'll take the bottom stay. You take the top one. When the pole comes up to the cabin, you grab it, the line, take a wrap, and don't let go. And I'll do the same for the bottom one. And then we'll inch our way until we can get it secured. So that was the plan. So the pole goes down, it comes up. I take a wrap, I'm hanging on, not letting go. But the pole is stronger than I am. And up I go the mast. In my baby doll's flopping in the wind. He grabs me by the hip boots. The hip boots fall off. Finally, I just let go because I would have been up to the top of the mast. So it was kind of humorous. It was very dangerous. But if you can think about this 20-year-old flopping in the wind in her nightgown, it was very scary. We ended up finally getting it secured, and we stayed that day. My dad was in another boat. We fished nearby, always following him to stay close because the pole had broken all of our antennas. So we had line of sight communication only. So if a boat wasn't within line of sight, we couldn't communicate with them. And we had tried calling him all morning to let him know we were broken down, and he'd been trying to call us, but neither one of us could hear each other. And finally, another fisherman said, hey, Travis, your kids are trying to get a hold of you. And then we realized what was going on. And so we stayed really close to him. Then when the weather cleared after a day or two, we were able to lower that pole back and secure all the stays and everything and continue our fishing trip. But it was a pretty horrendous day. The same day, because we couldn't fish, all we're doing is tacking back and forth, following my dad, I decided that I could wear my new tennis shoes. So I never wore shoes at sea. If I wore anything, it was the hip boots that didn't fit. But I thought, I don't have to go out on the deck. Now because we were in heavy seas, there was always water on the deck. But if you got the boat when it was level, there would be only that much. And I could take one step to go to the bathroom, to the head. Now the head was just a pine box. It was not anything fancy. It just had little hinges like you have in a kitchen cabinet, and it leaked. So we couldn't keep our toilet paper in there. So when I had to use the head, I timed everything. I tucked my toilet paper like so, and I timed it until we were level. I took my one leap and opened the door and went into the toilet. I sat down, but now we're in such heavy seas and it faced across the boat that I put my feet up on the door to keep from flying off the toilet. Well, when I did that and the boat rolled and my weight pushed on that door, down went the door and my toilet paper got wet, water rushed in, and I almost fell off the toilet. It was awful. When I got back into the cabin, I just sat down and cried and said, I don't want to do this anymore. So all of that happened in 24 hours. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Lost our friends, fuel transfer, the breakdown, all of that, all happened in 24 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
The wild 24.
Yeah. Yeah.
The worst 24 hours.
That was, probably the worst. That was really hard. That was a rough one. Yeah. I spilt milk because it was just so rough, milk, the ice chest we had. So our food was kept refrigerated in the fish hold. We had ice and coils, and we had a shelf that we would keep our fruits and vegetables and milk and refrigerated things in there. But we would keep just enough for like a day or two in an ice chest in our cabin. And that day, the ice chest tipped over, the milk went everywhere. I mean, it was just a
That
pretty
same
bad,
day.
pretty bad, same day, pretty bad day. Yeah.
Lots of memories,
Yeah.
though. Lots of memories.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome. I can see you're very fond of those memories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some I would prefer not to have, but yeah, I can laugh about it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me at your home and being willing to talk to me about your experiences.
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry my son didn't make it. I will contact my brother and give him your information, and I will also do the same for Bill.
Thank you. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
And good luck with your project.